At the Institute for the Deaf and Dumb, Dr. Itar and his wild child pupil forged ahead. The doctor's work and the child's learning progressed more quickly now. They had the additional influence of the boy's governess, Madame Guérin.
Est-ce que Monsieur Petit viendra le voir cet après-midi?
Ah, je crois pas, Madame Guérin.
Through his actions, the boy gained the ability to express himself with increasing clarity, but speech eluded him.
Il me regarde. Oh!
Dr. Itar noticed that one sound, O, always attracted the boy's attention. So Dr. Itar gave him a name which included this sound.
Victor? Voilà, il a un nom.
From now on, he was called Victor. Anxious for Victor to speak, the doctor decided to concentrate on eau, the French word for water. Perhaps Victor could say eau as easily as he recognized the sound.
Oh! Oh! Oh!
Oh.
Oh! Oh! Oh!
Oh.
Oh! 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 Oh!
Oh.
Oh! 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 Oh!
Undeterred, Itar continued his experiment with another sound, and eventually Victor spoke his first word, the French word for milk.
Bravo! Voilà! Bien fait!
Next, Itar set about teaching Victor to recognize symbols, first by matching objects to drawings, and then shapes to shapes. The doctor's goal? To develop Victor's memory of a sequence of shapes, which in time would be replaced with letters. The letters then formed into words. To Victor, these exercises seemed pointless and boring. He could not appreciate the goals Dr. Itar had set, and now the learning had ceased to be fun. As the tasks became more complex, he became increasingly difficult and frustrated. Had Itar's revolutionary experiments reached their limit? Did Victor's learning abilities have boundaries the doctor could not trespass? Itar persisted, and slowly, Victor began to recognize words. The doctor would give him a piece of paper with the name of an article, and the boy would fetch it from the next room. Dr. Itar then took the experiment one stage further. He locked the door to the room. What would Victor do when asked to find an item? Although similar objects were in the room with them, Victor ignored them. Itar suddenly realized that knife, box, and book meant only those particular items they habitually used in their experiments. So Itard had to explain that a book was any book.
Voilà. Livre. Livre. Donnez-moi les mains. Voilà.
Gradually, Victor's vocabulary increased to include the use of adjectives.
Grand livre. Petit livre. Grand livre.
And finally, the ultimate achievement, writing. Victor never learned to speak more than a few words, but he could write his needs. After 6 years of study with Dr. Itard, he moved out of the Institute to live a long and reasonably normal life in the care of his governess. Dr. Itard had kept his journals faithfully throughout his association with Victor. Their publication revolutionized educational treatment of the mentally handicapped. As for the wild boy of Aveyron, certainly he could no longer be classed as an idiot or a savage. We have always been fascinated by creatures that lurk within our imaginations. Fantastic creatures which are half man, half beast. Where our ancestors marveled at mermaids and centaurs, we wonder about Yeti and the Sasquatch. If they exist, are these really wild men? Have they perhaps been reared by animal parents? Is it credible that a ferocious beast would actually suckle a man cub and defend it against other animals? For one answer, we went to a remote part of the Scottish Highlands, where one man has devoted his life to the study of wolves and their behavior. Ian Brodie.
To my mind, it's quite possible that particularly a bitch who's lost a litter may well respond favorably to the cries of a human infant. That's not necessarily conclusive that she would do so, but it does suggest it's possible. It is man's oldest friend, after all. It's also our oldest enemy. So we brought it into the house. It's quite likely a reverse adoption could take place. The same way that a human baby cries, the mother then feeds it at her breast. Well, if the child cries and the wolf is prepared to allow it to suckle, then the cry is satisfied. No more cry, no more problems. So the wolf, I think man and wolf, being two social animals, get on very well together.
I think this is highly unlikely, and the reason I say this is that the human infant is the poorest of all survivors. Therefore, if a child is abandoned as an infant, there is no doubt that that child will probably die or be killed by predators, particularly in a wild area of country. And I think what happens, if a child is going to survive, then he probably is older, he finds some way of surviving for himself. And because of that, he naturally becomes wild. He's got to steal. He's got to kill if necessary. He's got to keep himself warm. He's got to hide away from other wild animals. And so it's simply a striving for survival that will condition his behavior. But I really can't imagine that these children have been brought up by animals.
In Search Of has investigated isolated societies where survival is not taught, but must be learned by trial and error. These children may be a link to the totally isolated wild children who had only animals to use as examples. Perhaps the closest modern counterpart to wild children is a California girl, Jeannie, who was discovered in 1970. Her story is recreated here for In Search Of. She had been kept in a small room, tied to a potty chair, from the age of 20 months until she was nearly 14 years old. Her parents were charged with child abuse. Her father later committed suicide. Her mother was sentenced to prison. Since her release, Jeannie has begun learning basic skills, but progress is slow. Apparently, there is a time in our lives for learning such skills. If that period is missed, the full mastery of those skills may be lost forever.
Coming up next, 1 Week in Time holds an amazing wealth of history as This Week in History takes a look at the opening of the Panama Canal, VJ Day,